Hi, my name is Osafu Augustine Egbon. On the night workshop on probabilistic and statistical methods, I will be presenting a work titled Spatial Power Prior Elicitation, a new approach for brain TMS. This is a collaborative work with Diego Nascimento and Francisco Luzaro. There might be a need for us to go back to the field to recollect and analyze data. This may occur when we believe that the distribution of our data to which we have built our model has changed. The distribution of our data to which we have tested our hypothesis and made inference has changed. In this case, there is need for us to go back to the field and re-observe the data. When we re-observe this data, what do we do with the historical data? There are two extreme choices we could make. One is to discard the previous data. In this option, if we discard the historical data, there might be some useful information in that data. Discarding it, discarding such information, we lose all the information that will be useful in the current analysis. In another option is to pull the current data and the historical data. In this case, when we pull the historical data and the current data, it might be a situation where the historical data could overshadow the current data and thereby leading to a wrong inference. So this challenge can be alleviated by controlling the amount of historical information incorporated in the current study. And one way we can achieve this is to use the power prior technique. Formally, suppose that the interest is to estimate theta in a current data D with available historical data D naught. Here, N and Y represents the uh, information of the current data, while N nons and Y nons are the information of the historical data. N represents the sample size and Y represents the response variable. Now, Ibrahim and Chen propose a power prior for estimating parameter theta, which is given as equation 1. Here, the power prior is made up of the likelihood and the prior knowledge we have about the parameter before observing the historical data. Here, the likelihood is weighted by discounted by a parameter omega naught. Here, when the parameter is equal to 0, it means that no information is incorporated in the current study. Then the power prior is equivalent to the prior knowledge we have before observing the historical data. So when omega naught is 1, it implies that all the information in the historical data are incorporated in the study. So in this case, it is just a base update of the prior knowledge we have before observing the historical data. Yeah, omega naught discounts the historical data due to the heterogeneity between D and D naught. So we expect omega naught to be 1 when D is the same as D naught. And we expect omega to be 0 when D is very different from D naught. Now, Abraham Machine extended equation 1, the power prior given in equation 1, to that given in equation 2. The only difference is that they allowed omega naught to vary. So omega naught was assigned a prior distribution given as pi of omega naught given gamma naught. However, the one in her thesis proposed a modification of the joint power prior in 2 with some attractive properties, and it is given as equation 3. The difference between equation 2 and equation 3 is the introduction of the likelihood, is the introduction of the normalizing constant. Now, in the special context, let's assume we have 3 historical data collected in spatial site G1, G2, and G3. And G represents the spatial site of the current data. Now, we have assumed in this study that G1, G2, and G3 are all the same spatial window. Yet the the assumption makes sense because when we perform an experiment on a particular region, and after some time we feel the data distribution has changed, and there is need for us to go back to the field and recollect this data. But we do not assume that the location to which we have collected the data is the same. For example, in the spatial site G, we collected data at this point, and this point. Whereas in the previous data collected at site G1, the location was collected, the spatial site where data was collected was this point and this point, which is different from the locations which we collected the current data, and so on with G2 and with G3. So we represent the spatial data as a set of this combination. The only difference between this combination and the ones I've showed earlier is the introduction of the spatial location. Here we use this to represent the spatial sites of G3 corresponding to G3. We use this to represent the spatial data corresponding to G2, and this corresponding to G1, and this corresponding to the current spatial region we are interested in. Now, suppose the historical data is available and we assume that the observed spatial component variables have been adjusted for. Then we assume that Y has a Gaussian distribution given as this and are independent given these parameters, given the spatial field. And we assume that we assume a Gaussian Markov random fit prior for the spatial field given as what we have here. Q is a correlation matrix. I'll be discussing on the next slide on how we obtain the correlation matrix. With respect to a graph G naught, here we assign a prior, gamma prior to the tau parameter here, and we assign a prior, is arbitrary at this moment, to omega naught. So A naught is a non-projection matrix in that A naught could be used to form a linear combination of the spatial field. For example, given an outcome, given an outcome at spatial location I, we could use A naught matrix to form a linear combination of the spatial field surrounding the location where we have observed our data. So A naught is a projection matrix which is used to form a linear combination of the spatial field. So if this A naught is an identity matrix, it implies that each of the data is linked to a unique spatial field. Yeah, from equation 4, we derive the joint power prior for the spatial field, which is given as what we have here, equation 5. Here, D inverse is given as this expression, and B is given as this expression. K is given as this expression, V is given as this expression, and kappa is a set of phi, of psi, and no. So when we set omega not to be 0, we see that D inverse is equals to K inverse, which is the correlation matrix of this Gaussian Markov random field. So B, if we set omega to be 0, then B is equals to 0, K is equals to 2 beta, V is equals to 2a, and so on. Now, we consider a Matter correlation function for deriving the correlation matrix Q. So each element Qij is determined by this formula, which is a Matter correlation function. The K here represents a Bessel function of the second kind. And these represent the Euclidean distance between the location Si and Sj. The parameters psi are all positive parameters, and they determine the smoothness of the spatial field. When we have k number of historical data, then a simple substitution could be made to derive the spatial power prior for estimating the posterior distribution of the random field. So when we have multiple data, we just need to sum over the quantities we have here for B, for K, and for N naught, omega naught, given as this expression or this equation we have here. Now we took an example by setting the psi to be 7, the nu to be 2, tau to be 3.3, N naught to be 200, and Q, which is the size of the spatial field, to be 156. N naught, which is a replication, to be 1. N naught is equals to 1 implies that only a single observation was observed at each of the spatial location. And the field theta has a Gaussian Markov random field given as this expression we have here, and y naught is given as this expression. Now, using this specification, our correlation matrix Q is a sparse matrix. A naught is also a sparse matrix. D inverse, which is what the expression I gave in the previous slide, is also a sparse matrix. However, D is not a sparse matrix; it's a dense matrix. So when we have a dense matrix, it becomes really computationally intensive to evaluate this matrix. Now we check the performance of of this power prior on each of the Gaussian each of the random field by varying the parameter of omega naught. Now, if we see here, this is the density of the first random field, which is theta 1, we denoted by theta 1. So we see that for this theta 1, as omega naught, which is the discounting parameter, increases, the density gets thinner, thinner, and thinner. That means the precision is increasing while the variance is decreasing. With the same specifications of parameters, we also simulated a historical data, which is given as this data we have here, and we use the power prior to smooth over the entire region, which is what we have in this part of the slide. Now, in the trying to merge the current data and the historical data, we consider Yij, where I represent the location where data was collected, and J is the replication, as this distribution. And we have J is the replication, I is the location. We given this linear predictor, Y is normally distributed. Yeah, this linear predictor, the beta is used to model the linear effects, and psi here is used to model non-linear effect, which is random effect. We use this theta to model the spatial effect. We assume a random walk of order 2 with Gaussian error, for the non-linear parameter, and we assume a multivariate Gaussian for the beta parameter. And then the James prior for theta, omega naught, and tau is given as the power prior we developed in the previous slides. Now, for a particular case, we assume that omega naught is a beta distribution. We reparameterize the beta distribution to have this expression given these constraints. Yeah, we apply this developed method in a transcranial magnetic stimulation experiment. Yeah, the transcranial magnetic stimulation is a neurophysiological device for obtaining cortical information in the brain. Yeah, it is made up of TMS coil, which is used for stimulation, and electromyography for recording motor evoked potential. Before stimulation, we first form a grid on the scalp of the patient and then use the TMS coil to release pulses to the brain. The pulses, the TMS coil releases some magnetic field which passes through the scalp unimpeded down to the scalp, down to the brain cells, which then depolarizes the cell, causing them to release action potentials through the axons down to the corticospinal tract to the first right dorsal of the interossseous muscles. So the recording we have from the electromyography forms our outcome of interest. So for each location on the field, on the spatial location, for each location on the grid, we have a corresponding electromyography readings. Yeah, from the experiments, the black spots here represent the historical locations where we stimulated the brain, and the red spots here represent the locations where we stimulated the brain in the current data set, in the current spatial site. Yeah, the outcome variable is the log transform of the motor evoked potential, and the covariates included in the modeling is the cluster ID, which was modeled using linear effects, BIRA, and the number of pulses delivered, which was modeled using random effect, psi, and the spatial location, which was modeled using the spatial effects, TIRA. Now, after tuning the hyperparameter, the best hyperparameter found was psi equals 1, nu equals 1. The parameter for the non-linear effects, which is the random walk, was 0.01, and A, which is the parameter for the tau, was 10 and 2 respectively. We sampled 10,000 MCMC posterior samples. The first 2,000 were dropped as burning. So the posterior estimate, posterior mean of the weight parameter was estimated to be 0.862, and the density of the parameter of the omega naught is given as what we have here. So the result shows that the similarity between the historical TMS section and the current TMS section is about 86.2%. That means 82% of the total variation in the previous historical TMS section was incorporated into the current study. Yeah, this is the posterior predictive of the current data. The posterior predictive was obtained using combining all the effects in the linear predictor. Now, taking account of the spatial dimension, the posterior predictive is given at this figure we have here. So this point signifies the region of the brain where maximum motor evoked potential can be obtained. So the distribution is unimodal, and the hotspot is given as 52, minus 8, 52 on the x-axis and minus 8 on the y-axis, and the predicted motor evoked potential is 429. So we expect that these spots will produce the maximum, the largest motor evoked potential, which is very useful in neuroscience. So if this position of the brain is known, then stimulation of this brain causes more reaction, more depolarization of the brain cells, which then releases more action potentials. Now, the interpolation of the spatial field, we also observe that it is unimodal and is given as this graph we have here. It is obtained using the spatial field theorem. Now, the effect of the number of TMS pulses delivered, we observe that as the number of TMS pulses increases, there is a decrease in the motor evoked potential. This makes sense because as we stimulate the brain cells, the population of brains depolarizes and releases action potentials. So when you keep stimulating, the action potentials released keeps decreasing and decreasing over time, over the duration of stimulation. And we also observe that there's heterogeneity in the cluster locations of the spatial site. We observe that these blue, light blue densities represent the competing locations where maximum motor evoked potentials could be located. Yeah, crucial consideration, we could consider algorithms that could be efficient when we have availability of big data. When we have big data, the inversion, the processing of this matrix becomes really complex because it is very dense. And the denseness of matrix D increases with the number of historical data. So once we begin to accumulate historical data, then matrix D becomes dense and denser and denser. And as it is dense, becoming denser, we require more computational effort to factorize such a matrix. So crucial consideration could be to develop an algorithm that could efficiently compute the matrix D. These are the references I use. These are the main references, and this is it. Thank you.